Hello and welcome to another episode. On our agenda today, we have a number of things. We're going to look at adverbs of manner, if conditionals, and some language functions. Let's get started. What are adverbs of manner? Adverbs of manner are used to show how something is done or how something happens. Let's look at the first sentence. My brother drives carefully. The second sentence we have here is my cousin paints beautifully. The students entered or walked into the classroom enthusiastically. These all show how something happens or how something is done. Let's look at how we form adverbs of manner. Adverbs of manner are formed by adding ly to the end of an adjective. Let's look at these words. We have the word quick, an adjective. We simply add ly, it becomes quickly. Slow becomes slowly. Careful becomes carefully. And these are some examples. However, there are some spelling rules that you need to take into consideration. Let's look at the first rule. If your adjective ends with a y, what do? You remove the y and add I and then ly. So if your adjective ends with y, one of the example, happy, what do? We remove the y and add an I. Then we add ly, so it'll be happily. If we have angry, we remove the y and we add what? I-L-Y. Now what happens if your adjective ends with le? Very simple. Remove the e and add a y. So if you have the word terrible, all you have to do is remove the e and add a y. Terribly. Very, very simple. And next example here is we have incredible. Incredible, remove the e and add a y. Very simple. Now, let's look at the position of an adverb in a sentence. In a sentence, you can have the adverb before an adjective. For example, I'm terribly sorry. Or you can have the adverb before a past participle. For example, no one was seriously injured in the accident. You can also have your adverb before another adverb. For exaggeration, for example, he's working incredibly slowly. These are all examples of how adverbs or where adverbs are used. There are some irregular adverbs. These irregular adverbs don't follow the same pattern rules by removing the I or the Y or the E. They're very different. They're irregular for a reason. So they don't follow the spelling rules. We have the most common one here, good. We don't say goodly, we say well. So we say he speaks English well. Another irregular adverb is fast. Fast says the same, so we just say fast. The same goes for the rest of the adverbs. Here you have hard, late, early, daily, and wrong. They all stay the same. Let's practice some adverbs here. We have an example here. Let's read it together. All you have to do is choose the correct answer. Newborn babies should be held careful, carefully, or most careful. What do you think the answer should be? The answer is carefully. Excellent. This brings us to the second grammar rule we have today, the if conditionals. There are 4 types of conditionals we have. We have the zero conditional, the first conditional, the second conditional, and the third conditional. We'll tackle them together. Let's look at how the if clause or if conditional is formed. The if conditional is formed by having 2 components in the sentence. We have the if clause and the main clause. Or we can start with the main clause, then the if clause. However, both clauses need to be present in the sentence. The first conditional we'll tackle today is the zero conditional. And the zero conditional is used when we're talking about something that always happens, when something happens and causes something to happen all the time. What do I mean by that? I mean, for example, in the morning, if it's morning, the sun rises. Whenever it's morning, the sun always rises. This is a scientific truth. It always happens. And this is when we use the zero conditional. So basically, we use it when we're talking about a general truth, not a specific situation. Let's look at an example. If you don't brush your teeth, you get cavities. This is a scientific truth. Something that will happen, not will, something that happens. You don't brush your teeth, you get cavities. If you eat junk food, you get fat or you gain weight. The same thing. This is something that always happens. So the composition of the zero conditional is we have our if clause and the main clause. The if clause is or consists of if plus the present simple, and the main clause, the verb in the present simple. If I am late for school, my teacher gets angry. This always happens, and this is what we're talking about when it comes to the zero conditional. We can also have it the other way around, and we start with our main clause. My teacher gets angry if I'm late for school. So it's not a problem to start with the main clause or the if clause as long as the two clauses are present. Let's look at the second conditional we have here, the first conditional. And the first conditional is basically used when we're talking about something that's likely to happen in the future. So we're talking about something, a situation that's likely to happen. What do I mean? So we're going to be using the simple present in the if clause, and in the main clause we'll use the future tense because we're talking about a likely outcome, something that will happen. If you rest and notice the verb here is in the present simple, you will feel better. We used will for the future and feel better, the verb in the base form. Another example here, if you set your mind to a goal, you will achieve it. And here what we're doing is we're talking about something that's likely to happen. Something caused it. You did something. If you set your mind to a goal, you will achieve it. A situation caused something to happen. So the form of the first conditional is very simple. In our if clause, we have if plus the verb in the present simple. In the main clause, we have will and the verb in the future simple tense. Very simple. If I am late for school, my teacher will get angry. Now here, the difference between this sentence and the previous sentence is the situation itself. You know your teacher, she may not get angry. She may get angry, and that's why we use the first conditional. So it depends on the situation you're talking about. You can also start with the main clause. My teacher will get angry if I'm late for school. Very simple. This brings us to the second conditional. Second conditionals are used when we're talking about unrealistic future events. So we're talking about something that's will not likely happen or is completely unrealistic. And this is when we use second conditional. When you're using any conditional, think about it as situations. It's a situation, if, when, the same thing. So let's look at how they're formed. When we use the second conditional, we have our if clause, and we use it by adding if and had, and then we have the main clause, we have would, and the verb in the base form. Very simple. Let's look at an example. If I had a lot of money, notice I have if I had, this is what we add, had a lot of money. Now notice had here is the verb. It's in the past tense. We don't add had. We can use if I get, or if I got, sorry. We're using the verb in the past. If I plus the verb in the past tense, you have the main clause would and the verb in the base form. If I had a lot of money, I would travel to the moon. Notice, now sometimes you get confused with the word had, don't, because it's there to confuse you. Let's look at another example. If I owned, and notice here the verb is in the past. If I owned a zoo, I would let people interact with the animals. Notice we have would plus let, the verb in the base form. Notice these are very important things. Don't confuse have and had. We can use have as a verb when I say I have money, or we can have it as a helping verb or an auxiliary. Very simple. Let's look at the second conditional and how it's formed. Again, we have the if clause and the main clause. In the if clause, we have if plus the verb in the past simple. In the main clause, we have would plus the base form of the verb. So for example, if I were rich, I would buy a Ferrari. Notice if I were, where is the verb in the past, and the second part is I would and buy the base form of the verb. Again, you can start with the main clause and say I would buy a Ferrari, and then complete it with the if clause by saying I would buy a Ferrari if I were rich. Very, very simple. If I were rich, I would buy a Ferrari if I were rich. Easy. Now we come to the third conditionals. And the third conditionals are basically used when we talk about something, a past situation, an imagined past situation, and show some regret about what happened in the past. So again, it's all about situations. We're talking about something that didn't happen, could have happened. So we're talking about the past and you kind of regret it. You have a sense of regret. You're thinking, why did this happen? And what could have happened? This is the trick to the third conditional. So let's look at how it's formed. For example, I can say, if you had told me you needed a ride, I would have left earlier. Or if you had paid attention, you would have understood the grammar rules. Now we can analyze and look at how it's formed by saying if clause, main clause. In the if clause, you have if plus the past perfect verb, and the main clause you have would, have, and the verb in the past perfect, verb 3. How is this formed? Let's look at an example. If you had studied harder, you would have passed the exam. If you had studied, notice here had is the helping verb. If you had studied, you would have passed. Again, we can also start with the main clause and then the if clause, and we can say you would have passed if you had studied harder. And that brings us to the 3. We ended the 3 conditionals, and before we start our practice, let me ask you one thing. You need to focus on 2 things. You need to focus on the if clause and the main clause. When it comes to answering questions, look at the sentence. Which part is mentioned? Do they mention the if clause and the main clause? If they mention the main clause, look at the verb. Which tense does it come in? Is it in the present tense? That means you're going to use either the 0 conditional or the first conditional, and look at the situation. Are they talking about something that always happens, which means you're going to be using the 0, or about something that's likely to happen, which means you're going to be using the first? If the verb is in the past, that means obviously you're going to be using the second conditional, and you would simply add would to the if clause. If it's in the past perfect, that means you have to use the third conditional. And the same goes if the if conditional is provided for you, the if clause, and you see if I studied, look, if I studied, that means you're going to use the second conditional, and you're going to add would and the base form. So this is very important to look at what's mentioned to help you add to the sentence. So let's look at this example. The example in front of us is, if I go to the mall today, I shopping next week. If I go, where's the verb in the sentence? The verb is go. It's in the present. So obviously we're talking about something that's likely to happen or not likely to happen in the future. You can use both. What do you think? Will you choose I will not go next week, or I wouldn't go, I would go, or I would have gone? What do you think? The verb here, go, is in the present tense. Obviously, we're going to be using I will not go. Very easy, very simple. Let's look at the next example. If I had passed my driving test, what part of the if conditional is provided? We have the if clause. Let's analyze it. We have if, I had, and then we have the verb past. Had and past means obviously we're going to be using the third conditional where we add would have and the verb in the past participle. So what does this give us? Bought, would buy, will buy, or would have bought. What do you think? We're going to be using I would have bought. Excellent. One more example. If she worked harder, she what? If she worked, notice here worked is in the past. If we use the past, obviously we're going to be using the main clause with would. She would keep her job. Excellent, because she worked, and worked is in the past. This brings us to the end of our grammar, and it's time for functions. Let's look at what you need to do when it comes to functions. When it comes to functions, read the situation. After you read the situation, look at what you would say. Look at yourself and how you would respond to that situation. Put yourself in that exact situation and then respond. A natural respond. However, make sure you write a full, accurate sentence that starts with a capital letter and ends with a full stop. Let's look at our first example. The first example we have here, your friend thinks spending money on online courses is a good idea. How would you respond? They're likely to say, spending money on online courses is a good idea. You hear someone say that. What do you say? Spending money on online courses allows you to benefit. You give a reason. Or you can agree, I totally agree with you. I think it's a great idea. Or you can state advantages. There are many advantages of spending money on online courses. Very simple. Think about what you would say in that situation. The second example we have is your brother has decided to volunteer for charitable organizations. How would you say? I'm going to volunteer for a charity. How would you respond? You're going to express your opinion. In my opinion, that's a great idea. In my opinion, you should do it. Or you agree. I totally agree with you. I'm going to join you. Or to give advice. I think you should spend more time on charity. It's up to you how you would respond. And this brings us to the end of our episode. In this episode, we looked at a number of things. We looked at adverbs of manner. We looked at if conditionals, 0, first, second, and third. And we looked at situations and how to handle and tackle language functions. Thank you for watching.